I never told my son what was buried under the floorboards of the cabin in northern Maine. Not when he was 16 and still believed every locked room in a family had a heroic reason behind it. Not when he was 25 and newly engaged, smiling with the fragile confidence of a man who thought love could be managed if he was patient enough. Not when his mother was alive and sometimes looked at him across the dinner table with a sadness he mistook for illness, because by then the cancer had already begun its quiet work inside her body, and nobody wanted to give another shape to fear. Not after she died, not after the funeral, not after the first Christmas without her, not when he turned 40 and I told myself, while standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, that a grown man should be old enough to hear the truth about his own inheritance. Some truths do not become lighter because a child grows older. Some promises do not loosen because the person you made them to has been lowered into the ground. Some things you carry alone because that was the bargain, and you do not get to break a bargain simply because your shoulders have started to ache in the night. I was at my brother Holly's place outside Bangor when the phone rang, and if I live long enough to lose the sound of my own name, I think I will still remember the exact noise my phone made against the wooden arm of that porch chair. It was a dull buzz, low and ordinary, the kind of sound 100 people hear every day and forget a second later. But that night it cut through the evening like a blade drawn slow from leather. Holly's and I had been sitting out back with 2 beers, sweating in the cooling air, watching the last light drain through the pines behind his property. He had a fire going in the old iron ring near the edge of the grass, more for habit than heat, and the smoke moved sideways because the wind had shifted down from the north. He had just gotten me laughing, which was no small achievement in those years, telling the story about our father teaching us how to gut a deer when I was 11 and Holly's was 9, how Holly's had fainted into a pile of leaves and our father, instead of comforting him, had looked at me and said, "Well, at least now we know which one of you should work indoors." Holly's laughed from his chest, the same way he had laughed as a boy, big and unashamed, and I was about to add the part where our mother came outside with a dish towel and called our father a barbarian in front of the neighbors when my phone trembled on the chair. I looked down and saw my son's name, Daniel, one word on the glowing screen, but something in my stomach went cold before I touched it. A father knows the weather in his child's voice before the storm arrives. It is not mystical. It is repetition. It is thousands of small sounds stored inside the body without permission. You learn the difference between tired and wounded, between irritated and afraid, between a call made because something broke in the garage and a call made because something has broken in the life. I answered and brought the phone to my ear, and before I said hello, before I even breathed properly, I heard him say, "Dad." Just that. One word cracked open. I sat forward. Holly stopped laughing. The night behind his house seemed to stiffen around us. "What is it, son? You need to call somebody," he said, and his voice was moving too fast, slipping on itself. "The sheriff, maybe. I don't know. I don't know who. She's at the cabin." The beer bottle in my hand felt suddenly too cold. "Who is at the cabin?" "My wife, Dad. Marissa. She's there. She's driving up there right now. She took the SUV and her brother is with her, and she said she is not coming back until she finds it." I did not move. Holly's watched my face, and the laugh went completely out of him. "Finds what?" There was a silence on the line, and I heard my son's breath pull through his nose in a rough, frightened rhythm, the way a person breathes when he is trying not to fall apart while standing upright in his own kitchen. "She thinks there is money. She thinks you have been hiding money from us, from me. She kept saying that tonight, over and over, that you have lied to me my whole life, and that whatever is at the cabin belongs to me too, and if it belongs to me then it belongs to her because she is my wife. She said family assets do not stop being family assets just because old men get paranoid." I closed my eyes. In the black behind my eyelids, the cabin rose so clearly that for a second I could smell it. Cedar damp from the cold, dust in the braided rugs, old ashes in the black iron stove, pine pitch from the stack of split wood under the porch. I could see the sagging front steps my father and I rebuilt the summer before he died, the low roofline crouched under the trees, the bedroom at the back with the narrow window facing the slope of birches, the faded rag rug beside the bed, and beneath that rug the cut boards, their edges darkened by age and by all the times my hands lifted them and set them back down. Nobody had touched those boards since Ronald Reagan was still president, except me and my wife. Nobody living knew what lay under them except me, and for one brief season, before sickness claimed the last of her strength, Marlene. How does she know about the cabin? I asked. I told her, Daniel said, and the shame in his voice was worse than the panic. I told her months ago. We were talking about places you used to take me when I was a kid, and I said you had this cabin way up north, and that you never invited anyone there anymore. She kept asking questions after that. At first it seemed normal. She wanted to know if it had electricity, if it had land, if it was paid off, if there was a safe. I told her I did not know. I honestly did not know anything. I thought she was just curious. Dad, I did not know there was anything to know. Is she alone? No. Her brother is with her. Greg. He's driving because she said she was too upset to drive after what I said. What did you say? I told her to stop. I told her she was being crazy. I told her she could not just break into your cabin because she had some idea in her head. She looked at me like I was betraying her. She said if I had any spine, I would be the one going there, because I was the one you robbed by hiding things. Then she called Greg. They left maybe 2 hours ago, maybe less. She called me from the road and told me what they were doing, like she wanted me to hear it and feel helpless. I tried to talk her out of it. She hung up on me. 2 hours from the city, 4 hours to the cabin if the roads were clear and Greg drove fast. They would reach the gate near midnight. The access road from the gate to the cabin was half a mile of hard-packed dirt and stone, darker than a church after sunset, and easy to underestimate if you arrived there full of anger and entitlement. I stood up so quickly, my knee struck the underside of the porch table. Holly's stood with me. Listen to me, Daniel. I want you to stay where you are. Do not get in your car. Do not drive after her. Do not call her again. Do you understand me? Dad, she is my wife. I know what she is. I have to do something. You did something. You called me. Now sit tight and let me handle this. There was another silence. In it, I heard the little boy he had been. Not in the sound of his voice exactly, but in the shape of his fear. Daniel had been a careful child, the kind who apologized when other people bumped into him, the kind who used to stand beside his mother at church luncheons and hold plates for old ladies without being asked. He had grown into a strong man in all the ways people could see. He was a structural engineer. He could calculate loads in his head that would make most men reach for a computer. He could stand on a construction site in January wind and tell 3 subcontractors that a beam had been placed wrong and not raise his voice once. But in his marriage with Marissa, he had become that careful boy again, trying not to anger the room, trying not to make anyone leave. Dad, he said softly, if there is something there, if Mom left something, why didn't you tell me? Because it was not time. Is it time now? I looked at the dark pines beyond Holly's porch and felt the old promise settle heavier across my back. Almost, I said, stay home. I hung up before he could ask another question. Holly's had not spoken, but he had gone very still, which in my brother meant his mind was running faster than his body. He looked older in the porch light than he had 20 minutes before. We had both crossed 70, though neither of us liked saying it out loud, and the years showed differently on him. On me, they had narrowed everything. On him, they had thickened the silence around his eyes. What is at the cabin, Eli? He asked. I had not heard my brother use that tone with me since the night our father died. I stared at the beer I had set on the chair arm. Condensation ran down the glass and gathered on the wood. For 32 years, I had not told him. I had not told Daniel. I had not told a priest, a lawyer beyond the one who needed to draft the documents, or any friend at any table after any amount of whiskey. A secret kept long enough begins to feel less like something hidden and more like a room inside you. You can live around it. You can hang pictures over the door. You can laugh on porches while it sits there in the dark. But then one night your son calls and the room opens. I told him, not quickly. Some stories punish you if you rush them. I told Holly's about the floorboards and the old tin and the box beneath them. I told him about the safe deposit box in Portland, about the trust Marlene had created before she got sick, before she knew for certain that she was sick. Although I have never believed she did not feel something coming. Marlene had always possessed a kind of clear sight that made people uncomfortable. She could sit through a holiday dinner smiling politely and later tell me exactly who had lied, who was frightened, who wanted something, and who was dangerous because he did not yet know what he wanted. I had loved her for that and feared it a little. She saw the world without the soft fog I used to lay over people I wanted to trust. She saw Marissa the first Thanksgiving Daniel brought her home. I tried to remember the girl as she appeared that day and not as she was now, because memory can become unfair when the end has already happened. Marissa had been charming. She arrived with a bottle of wine too expensive for a simple family dinner, and a scarf the color of wet slate arranged around her neck with practiced care. She hugged Marlene first, touched her arms, told her the house smelled wonderful, said Daniel had told her so much about us, and when I asked about her work, she answered with careful warmth. Brand strategy, startups, digital storytelling, words that meant less to me than they meant to her, but she made them sound important. She laughed at Holly's jokes. She helped carry plates. She said Daniel was the kindest man she had ever met, and when he blushed, she placed a hand on the back of his neck in a gesture that looked affectionate if you did not notice the way her fingers tightened when he started to speak too long. That night, after everyone left and Daniel drove her back to the city, Marlene stood at the sink washing the good plates by hand, though the dishwasher worked fine. I dried beside her. For 10 minutes she said nothing. Then she handed me a plate and said, "That girl is going to try to take something from him one day." I looked at her, half amused and half irritated, because I had spent the evening convincing myself Daniel had found someone lively enough to pull him out of himself. "You got all that from one dinner?" Marlene looked out the kitchen window into the dark yard. She did not look dramatic when she said hard things. She simply made room for the truth and placed it there. She looks at people the way buyers look at houses they do not plan to live in. She checks the corners. She checks the foundation. She wants to know where the value is. I watched her every time she thought nobody was watching. "You don't like her." "I don't dislike her. That would be easier. I think she is hungry in a way Daniel mistakes for ambition." 3 months later, Marlene was diagnosed. 18 months after that, I buried her on a Tuesday in October, while the maples behind the cemetery burned red and gold, as if the whole state was showing off in front of grief. Between those two dates, while poison dripped into her veins and her hair thinned under scarves she pretended were fashion choices, she did exactly what she had told me she would do. She called an attorney named Lydia Crane, who had once handled a property dispute for my cousin, and frightened the opposing counsel so badly he retired within the year. She set up the trust. She wrote letters. She moved assets that Daniel did not know existed, because they were never meant to change how he lived, only to protect what his grandfather and mother had built. She brought Daniel to the kitchen table one Saturday afternoon, when Marissa was at a spa weekend with friends. Her hands were thin by then. The rings turned loose on her fingers. Her voice had weakened, but her eyes had not. She told our son certain things about signing, about not discussing documents with anyone, about trusting her even if he did not understand. He cried because she was dying, and because he was frightened by the seriousness in her face. He signed what she put in front of him. He did not tell Marissa, because his mother asked him not to. That promise at least he kept. When I finished telling Holly's, he rubbed both hands over his face and walked to the porch rail. For a long moment, he looked out across the darkening yard. Then he turned back, drained the last of his beer in one swallow, and said, "I'll get the truck." "You're not coming with me." "The hell I'm not." "Holly's." He pointed one finger at me, and for a second he was 9 again, furious because I had told him he was too young to climb the mill fence with me. "Do not stand there with your martyr face and tell me I am too old to ride shotgun into my own family's mess." "I need you to make calls," I said. "You will do me more good here than in the passenger seat." He hated that because he knew it was true. To Eddie. Yes, Eddie Pell was Marlene's cousin. He had managed the cabin and the surrounding 20 acres for as long as we had owned them. Managed is a large word for what amounted to checking the roof after storms, clearing deadfall from the access road, making sure no hunters camped on the property, and keeping a key to the gate at the bottom of the hill. Eddie lived 12 minutes away in a double-wide on land his father left him, and he had the kind of local knowledge that does not show up on maps or government forms. He knew who drank too much, who shot at signs, who had a police scanner, who would tow a car at midnight without asking questions, and which deputy in Aroostook County would answer his phone because he owed Eddie a favor from a snowmobile accident in 2009. Marlene had trusted him because he was not imaginative, and in certain situations, that is a virtue. He did what he was told, exactly as told, and no more. "Tell Eddie what is happening," I said. "Tell him to drive to the gate. Lock it from the inside and wait. Tell him not to engage with anyone, not one word beyond what is necessary. Tell him to call Deputy Warren out of the county office. Warren will remember me from a hunting trip years back. If he does not, tell Eddie to mention Marlene. Everybody remembered Marlene's. Holly's nodded once, already pulling out his phone. And you? I am driving. It's 3 hours from here if you don't stop. Then I won't stop. You are angry. Yes, too angry. I looked at him. The porch light hummed above us. In the kitchen behind him, his wife had left a lamp burning over the sink, though she had gone to visit their daughter in Augusta for the weekend. The whole house seemed gentle and domestic, and far away from what had just entered it. No, I said, not too angry, just finally angry enough. I drove with the windows cracked, even though the air had turned cold. I needed the sting of it on my face to keep my hands from tightening too hard on the steering wheel. The road north unspooled in front of me, black pavement silvered by headlights, white lines appearing and vanishing beneath the truck, as if the world were being fed through a narrow machine. I had driven those roads for most of my adult life. I knew where the shoulders crumbled, where the moose crossing signs actually meant moose, where the state police liked to sit behind low rises, where the radio faded into static and returned as French voices from across the border. That night, every mile had weight. I thought about Marissa because anger, when trapped in a moving vehicle, becomes a courtroom. It calls witnesses. It presents evidence. It replays moments you once dismissed because peace seemed cheaper than confrontation. I remembered the first dinner. I remembered the wedding planning, the way expenses grew like mold. I remembered Daniel standing in my garage one afternoon with both hands tucked into his pockets, saying, "Dad, I know this is a lot, but Marissa has always dreamed of something beautiful." I remembered saying, "A marriage is not more beautiful because the flowers cost $22,000. He had smiled without smiling and said, "I know, but it matters to her." That became the phrase that ruled his life. It matters to her. The resort on the coast mattered to her. The dress that cost more than my truck mattered to her. The 10-piece band mattered to her. The after-party mattered to her. The vintage car they rented for 40 minutes mattered to her because photographs mattered, and photographs mattered because perception mattered. And perception mattered because Marissa believed reality was something that took orders from presentation if presentation was expensive enough. At the wedding, Marlene had been gone 4 years. Daniel wore a navy suit and looked handsome and exhausted. Marissa floated through the reception like a woman, auditioning for a future in which everyone watched her enter rooms. Her smile never fell, but it changed depending on who stood in front of her. With her friends, it was bright and sharp. With her mother, it was tight and strategic. With Daniel, it was sweet when cameras were near and impatient when they were not. With me, it was respectful enough to be used as evidence later. She thanked me in her toast for helping make the day possible, and the whole room clapped while I sat there with the strange embarrassment of a man being applauded for financing a machine he did not understand. Later, near the bar, I heard one of her cousins say, "Daniel's lucky. Her family really elevated him." I almost laughed. Instead, I went outside and stood by the seawall and listened to the waves hit stone until Daniel came looking for me. "You okay, Dad?" I told him I was. Fathers lie in small ways first. 3 years into the marriage, they bought a house. Daniel bought it, legally speaking, because Marissa's credit was complicated. That was her word. Complicated. She said it lightly, as though credit scores were moody relatives who needed privacy. The house sat in a neighborhood of wide lawns and narrow souls, the kind of place where every shrub looked supervised. It had more bathrooms than people, and a kitchen designed for someone who photographed meals more often than she cooked them. Daniel invited me over after closing, and I watched him walk me through the rooms with pride trying to rise through anxiety. He pointed out the foundation, the roofline, the good bones, because he was my son and because he understood houses as structures before status. Marissa followed behind us barefoot, already talking about replacing the fixtures, repainting the downstairs, removing a wall she called visually heavy, and turning one room into a content studio. When I asked whether they planned to keep the old built-in shelves in the den, Daniel opened his mouth to answer, and Marissa placed her hand on his forearm. "We are trying not to let nostalgia make design decisions," she said with a soft laugh. It was not an ugly sentence. That was what made her dangerous. She rarely said ugly things in ugly ways. She wrapped them in polish. She used kindness the way some men use gloves when handling wire. She did not tell Daniel he was wrong in front of people. She corrected his vocabulary. She did not call me cheap. She said I had an old-world relationship with money. She did not say my truck embarrassed her. She said it was charming, then asked if I planned to park it behind the house during their summer party because the front drive would be photographed. She did not say she wanted Daniel isolated. She said boundaries were healthy and that newly married couples should build their own unit away from generational interference. Bit by bit, she taught him to hear concern as control and control as love. I saw it and still I hesitated. That is the shame I carry. Marlene had seen it early and prepared. I saw it later and told myself grown men must be allowed to live their own marriages. There is truth in that. There is also cowardice hidden inside it. I did not want to be the bitter father-in-law. I did not want Daniel to choose between me and his wife, because I already knew which choice a decent husband would try to make. So I swallowed small things until they became habits inside my throat. One winter night, Daniel called me after 3 glasses of wine. I could hear it in his voice. Not drunk, open. He was in that big house, probably standing at the kitchen island under lights Marissa had chosen because they photographed well. And he said, "Dad, do you ever feel like no matter how much you do, the number keeps moving?" What number? The number where everyone is okay. I sat in my living room with the television muted, Marlene's chair empty beside the window, and I closed my eyes. What happened? Nothing. Not one thing. Just the mortgage, the car, the memberships, her business coach, her assistant, the card balances. She says it is investment. She says image creates opportunity. She says I think small because I grew up with people who thought saving was a personality. That sounds like something she said. He gave a short laugh that broke instead of ending. She says you taught me fear and called it responsibility. I gripped the phone until my knuckles hurt. What did you say? Nothing. I did not want a fight. You don't have to keep living like that, Daniel. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, I do though. I love her. I let it go because that is what fathers do when they are afraid that pushing harder will push their child further away. You sit there in the dark, hearing the machinery grind, and you tell yourself the supports Marlene built will hold when the collapse comes. But knowing a bridge will hold does not make it painless to watch your son walk across it blind. The cabin was never really a cabin by the time Marissa went after it. My father bought the land in 1962 with money saved from overtime at the paper mill, cash folded in an envelope and carried in the inside pocket of his church jacket, because he did not trust banks when a handshake would do. He built the original place over 3 summers with me and Harley's and our Uncle Ray, helped by a quiet man everyone called Pop, though none of us ever learned his full name. Back then it was 2 rooms, a roof, a stove, and enough gaps in the walls for the wind to keep you honest. My father loved it more than he loved any house he actually lived in. He said a man needed one place that did not ask him to be useful. He died before he could make it comfortable. I inherited it in 1989 and spent the next 30 years improving it without letting it forget what it had been. Marlene and I added a screened porch, then a back bedroom, then a proper foundation wall, then a small finished basement where Daniel slept when he was a boy, and insisted he was not afraid of the dark even while keeping a flashlight under his pillow. We wired it carefully. We kept the wood stove. We never made it fancy. Comfort, Marlene used to say, should not erase character. Under the floorboards in the bedroom was not money, though it took a greedy woman to force me to say that plainly. There was a box. Inside the box was my father's tin of letters home from Korea, written in pencil and ballpoint on paper so thin the words seemed to breathe through both sides. There were my mother's diaries, 6 leather-bound books tied in faded ribbon, which she had given me during the last week of her life with instructions not to read them until I was old enough to stop needing her to be simple. I had not known what she meant then. I knew now. There was the original deed to the land, signed in pencil because my father had forgotten a pen. There was a photograph of my parents on their wedding day, the only one that survived a flood in my aunt's basement. There was a photograph of Marlene at 22, sitting on the hood of my old Ford the night I asked her to marry me, hair blown across her face, eyes bright with the terrifying generosity of youth. There was Daniel's first tooth in a pill bottle, his first lock of hair in a small envelope, the hospital bracelet from the day he was born, a tiny blue mitten Marlene could not throw away. There was Marlene's wedding ring, the one she removed the day before hospice because her fingers had grown too thin and she feared it would slip off in the sheets. There was about $4,000 in old bills my father had hidden during the 70s when he distrusted banks with a passion usually reserved for governments and snakes. I never spent it. By the time it came to me, it had stopped being currency. It was something his hands had touched. There were 2 other items in the box too, things I will not name even now, not because they are valuable, but because families are allowed to keep a few shadows sacred. That was the treasure. Letters, hair, ink, a ring from a dying woman, a father's stubborn cash, a record of ordinary love protected from time by a hole in the floor. Marissa imagined gold. I know she did. She imagined bonds, certificates, stacks of bills, jewels, something cinematic and hidden and available to the person bold enough to take it. She could not understand why I lived simply if there was no secret stash, because to her simplicity was either failure or concealment. She looked at my old truck, my worn jackets, my grocery store haircut, my refusal to upgrade perfectly good appliances, and concluded I was hiding wealth because she could not imagine having enough and not displaying it. She had asked about the cabin once at Christmas. We were all at Daniel's house, and she had seated me near the end of the table, not beside Daniel, not near the center where conversations formed, but close enough to be included if someone needed an old family story for warmth. She asked what I kept up there. A stove, I said. Some fishing rods. Books. Mouse traps when Eddie forgets to check. She smiled while slicing into ham. But there must be something else. Like what? I don't know. Old men and remote cabins. There is always something. Daniel laughed because he thought she was teasing. Marlene, had she been alive, would not have laughed. I felt that absence so sharply, I nearly stood from the table. Instead, I said, if I ever find pirate treasure under the bed, you will be the first to know. Marissa's smile held half a second too long. I remember that now. At the time, I let it pass. So many disasters are built from moments people let pass. I called Eddie from the road, and he answered on the second ring. Harley's had reached him. Yes, he was on his way to the gate. Yes, he had the key. Yes, he had called Deputy Warren. Yes, Warren was irritated but coming. Eddie sounded almost cheerful, which did not surprise me. Eddie had spent most of his life maintaining things other people ignored, and I think a part of him had been waiting decades for a night that required competence in the dark. I told him again not to engage. He said, Eli, I know what not to engage means. I asked whether he had coffee. He said he had coffee, a flashlight, and the thing Marlene made him keep. I told him to leave the last one where it was, unless the night became worse than we expected. He said, I know that too. Then I called Daniel. He picked up like he had been holding the phone in his hand the entire time. He was crying. He tried not to make sound, but I heard it. I pulled off briefly at a gas station outside Millinocket and sat under the harsh white light of the pumps, while logging trucks groaned past on the road. I am on my way, I said. Did you call the sheriff? Eddie did. A deputy will meet us at the gate. Is she going to be arrested? That depends on what she does. Dad, I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. She is saying you hid my inheritance. She is saying Mom manipulated me when she was sick. She is saying you both treated me like a child, and that she is the only person willing to fight for what should be mine. I know that sounds insane when I say it to you, but she kept saying it so calmly at first that I started wondering if there was something I did not know. That was Marissa's gift. She could make accusations sound like advocacy. She did not scream first. She built rooms inside your doubt and then invited you to sit down. I stared through the windshield at the gas station window, where my own reflection looked older than I felt. Your mother did not manipulate you. I know, no. You need to hear me. She protected you from what? From exactly this. He went quiet. A pump clicked off somewhere outside. A man in an orange vest climbed from a truck and went into the store, rubbing his hands together against the cold. Daniel said Mom knew. Yes, how long ago? Before the diagnosis. She saw things clearly. Why didn't she tell me? Because she knew you were in love. Because she knew if she spoke too plainly, you would defend Marissa and feel guilty later. Because she was dying and did not want your last months with her poisoned by a war she could fight better on paper than at the dinner table. Because mothers make choices fathers spend years trying to understand. He made a sound I had not heard from him since he was small and feverish. And you have carried this alone. That was my part. Dad, listen to me. What happens tonight is going to hurt. Not because of the cabin, because of what you will have to see. Do not protect yourself from it by explaining her behavior away. Do you hear me? Do not call it stress. Do not call it misunderstanding. Do not call it love gone temporarily wrong. She is driving through the night with tools in the back of a vehicle you pay for because she believes your family's dead owe her something. He cried harder then. I let him because there are tears that are not weakness. There are tears that wash denial out of a man. I reached the gate at 11:20. Eddie's pickup was parked sideways across the entrance, blocking the chain-link gate from inside the property line. Behind it sat Deputy Warren's cruiser, angled with the headlights off but the running lights glowing dull red in the ditch grass. Warren stood beside the cruiser in a heavy jacket, tall and lean, grey mustache, hat pulled low. He lifted a hand when I stepped from the truck. Evening, I lied. Evening, Deputy. Eddie climbed from his truck with a thermos in one hand and a flashlight in the other. His face was round and wind-burned, his eyes bright in a way that made him look younger than 68. Marlene always said Eddie looked like a man who knew where every spare part in the county was buried. He handed me the thermos without ceremony. Coffee. I took it. Thank you. Warren said. Eddie filled me in. I need your version for the record before anyone arrives. I gave it to him cleanly. Names, relationship, property ownership, the call from Daniel, the stated intention to search the cabin for hidden money, the fact that Marissa and Greg had no permission to be on the property, the fact that they were not yet on the property because we had beaten them to the gate. Warren listened without interrupting, occasionally writing in a small notebook. When I finished, he looked up the road, disappearing south into darkness. You understand, if they stop at the gate and turn around, there's not much to do. I understand. If they try to force entry, that's different. I know. He studied my face. You want them charged if they cross. I did not answer immediately. The night breathed around us. Somewhere in the woods, a branch cracked under its own weight, or under the foot of some animal moving unseen. I thought of Marlene's hand in mine in hospice, thin and hot, her voice almost gone but still carrying command. Do not let her win. At the time I had thought Marlene meant legally, financially. Now I understood she had meant something larger. Do not let greed rewrite the meaning of what we loved. Let's see what they do, I said. We waited. Eddie poured coffee into the thermos cap and passed it to Warren. Warren accepted. Nobody spoke for a while. There are silences men build together when talking would only reduce the seriousness of what stands between them. The temperature dropped. My hands ached. I thought about the first time I took Daniel to the cabin after Marlene died. He had been 36, newly married less than a year, and already tired in a way he kept trying to hide. We fished that weekend. He lost 2 lures in the rocks and burned the bacon and laughed more than I had heard him laugh in months. On the last morning, as we packed, he stood in the bedroom near the rug and said, Mom loved this place, didn't she? I said yes. He asked if we should bring Marissa next time. I said maybe. I remember the pause that followed. I remember thinking Marlene would have known exactly what to say. I only said maybe. Headlights appeared at 12:12. They came slowly over the rise, sweeping between trees, then dropped toward us. A black SUV, glossy even under road dust. The kind of machine Marissa believed announced worth before anyone had to speak. It slowed when the driver saw the blocked gate, the pickup, the cruiser, the 3 men standing in cold light. For a long moment, nobody got out. The engine idled. I could see silhouettes moving inside. Then the passenger door opened. Marissa stepped out dressed for the version of the night she had imagined. Brand new hiking boots, stiff and expensive. Dark leggings, a canvas field jacket over a cream sweater. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that looked styled to appear practical. A flashlight in her hand. She looked first at the gate, then the deputy, then Eddie, then me. Her face changed 3 times in one breath. Surprise, irritation, calculation. It settled into a frozen smile. Eli, she said, as if we had met unexpectedly at a farmer's market. What a surprise. Evening, daughter. She hated when I called her that. I had noticed it years ago, and to my shame or satisfaction never stopped. It reminded her that marriage had given her a title she could use, but not command. What are you doing here? She asked. It's my property. Of course. I just meant this late. I might ask you the same thing. She glanced at Warren and adjusted her grip on the flashlight. My brother and I were driving through. We were looking at land in the area. Weekend property. Daniel and I have talked about it, and Greg knows real estate, so we thought we would get a sense of the roads. At midnight, Warren said. Marissa turned toward him with the full polished attention she gave men she believed could be charmed. Deputy, I know it looks odd, but we left late, and my family has always done spontaneous drives. I am sorry if there is some misunderstanding. Warren leaned slightly to see through the windshield. Sir, would you step out of the vehicle, please? Greg did not move at first. Then the driver's door opened, and he climbed down with the heavy reluctance of a man realizing the favor he agreed to had acquired legal dimensions. He was broad, thick through the shoulders and waist, wearing a baseball cap and a sweatshirt under a jacket. His eyes moved from Warren to me and away again. He looked afraid of his sister, afraid of the deputy, and most of all afraid that he had been stupid. Evening, Warren said. Name? Greg gave it. Would you open the back for me? Marissa's smile sharpened. Deputy, is that necessary? We have not done anything. That's what I'm trying to establish. Greg looked at Marissa. She gave him a tiny look that meant no, but Warren had already taken one step toward the rear of the SUV. Greg opened the hatch. The interior light came on, and the story she had prepared collapsed in the yellow glow. There were 2 duffel bags, a coil of rope, work gloves, a crowbar, bolt cutters, a pry bar, a folding shovel, 2 flashlights still in plastic packaging, a canvas tool roll, and a plastic storage tub with empty packing blankets inside. No tent, no sleeping bags, no cooler, no maps. Nothing that suggested camping, hiking, land shopping, or spontaneity. Everything that suggested entry, removal, and transport. Warren looked inside for a long moment. Eddie shifted beside me but said nothing. Marissa's nostrils flared. Greg stared at the ground. Ma'am, Warren said mildly, that's a lot of weekend property research. Marissa laughed once. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard from her, because it was almost normal. Greg does renovations. He brings tools everywhere. Greg looked up sharply, betrayed by the ease with which she handed him the weight. Do you? Warren asked him. Sometimes, Greg said, at midnight, with bolt cutters. Greg swallowed. Marissa stepped forward. This is harassment. My husband is part of this family. This land has family significance, and I have every right to understand what assets are being concealed from him. There it was, not the lie now, the belief beneath it. Assets, concealed, right, words she had carried through the dark like legal charms. Warren turned his head slowly toward her. Are you saying you came here tonight to search Mr. Cole's property for assets? I am saying Daniel has a right to transparency. Daniel is not here because he is emotionally manipulated by his father. I felt Eddie look at me. I did not move. Warren took out his phone and photographed the tools. Marissa's composure cracked at the edges. You cannot photograph my private belongings. I can photograph items in plain view during a trespass investigation. There is no trespass. Not yet. The phrase settled hard. Not yet. Marissa heard it too. For the first time that night, her eyes went from cold to uncertain. She looked at the gate as if it had personally betrayed her by existing. She looked past it toward the dark road climbing to the cabin. She was so close that whatever fantasy had driven her north must have been throbbing in her head. She had come all that way, built herself into a righteous fury, dragged her brother into it, frightened her husband, and now 3 old men and a deputy stood between her and a room of floorboards she believed would change her life. Warren finished writing. He took Marissa's license. He took Greg's. He walked back to his cruiser and spoke quietly into the radio, then returned. Mr. Cole, he said, would you like to file a complaint tonight for attempted trespass and conspiracy to commit burglary? Marissa's head turned toward me so fast the ponytail snapped against her collar. Greg closed his eyes. Eddie muttered something under his breath that might have been a prayer. I looked at my daughter-in-law. I saw the woman who had smiled over Christmas ham and asked about safes. I saw the bride holding Daniel's hand for photographs, while angling her face toward the more important guest. I saw the woman correcting him gently until his sentences became shorter. I saw Marlene in the kitchen years ago saying, "That girl is going to try to take something from him one day." And beneath all of that, strangely, I saw a younger face. Not innocent, not forgivable, just human in the worst way. Hungry, frightened, empty, and convinced that taking would feel like safety. "Not tonight," I said. Warren blinked. Eddie turned toward me. Marissa's face loosened in disbelief. "Not tonight," I repeated. "I am going to do something different." I stepped closer to the gate. Warren shifted subtly, staying near enough to intervene. Marissa did not move back. Pride held her there when wisdom would not. "Come here, daughter." She came because she did not know yet whether she had one. That uncertainty was all over her. Her chin lifted. Her eyes were wet but not soft. I lowered my voice so the others could not hear every word, though the dash camera in my truck was recording, as Marlene's lawyer had advised me years before for any confrontation involving property. "There is nothing up there that you want," I said. She opened her mouth. "Listen to me. Not speak. Listen. There is no money under those floorboards. There is no jewelry you can sell. There is no investment account. No gold, no bearer bonds, no secret will naming you queen of the Maine woods. The thing Daniel's mother left him is already in a trust that you cannot touch. The house you live in is protected in a way you cannot unwind. The accounts you believe are soft because Daniel pays bills from them are not what you think they are. The SUV you rode here in is leased through an entity that owns nothing else. And if Daniel stops paying it, which after tonight I suspect he will, it will be gone within weeks. Do you understand me?" Her lips parted. Her breath came shallow. "You signed a prenuptial agreement 6.5 years ago. You told Daniel you barely read it because you trusted him. That was not true. You read it for 43 minutes in my dining room while your attorney sat beside you and explained the separate property provisions twice. Marlene had the meeting recorded with everyone's consent, including yours. You laughed about it at the end and said paperwork bored you. Your attorney kept a file receipt. You fired him 2 weeks after the wedding because he told you not to treat Daniel's premarital protections as theoretical. The agreement will hold." "That's illegal," she whispered. "No, what you came here to do tonight is illegal." What Marlene did was careful. Her face went white at my wife's name. Maybe because dead women are supposed to stay safely sentimental. Maybe because she had forgotten that Marlene had been a person before she became a memory Daniel could be trained not to mention too often. "What is under the floor," I continued, "is a box of letters written by my father from Korea to my mother. Diaries my mother asked me to keep. Marlene's wedding ring, Daniel's first tooth, a lock of his hair, the original dyed to this land, some photographs, a little old cash that belonged to my father and means less as money than as evidence that he once believed hiding things might keep a family safe. That is what you drove 4 hours to steal. You were going to break into a cabin to take a dead woman's ring and a soldier's letters, because you convinced yourself love was hiding a balance sheet from you." Her eyes filled then. Tears gathered quickly, angrily, as if even her body resented surrendering proof of pain. I did not enjoy seeing it. I want that understood. I took no pleasure in the collapse of her face. Revenge is warm in stories, but in life it often feels like standing in cold mud, holding a receipt for something nobody should have purchased. "You don't know what it is like," she said, and her voice had lost its polish. "You don't know what it is like to live with someone who lets his father control everything. Daniel never chooses me first. Never. Your wife died and turned herself into a ghost in our marriage. Every decision, every tradition, every holiday, every piece of furniture he doesn't want to replace. Every time he says, 'My mom used to,' I have had to compete with a dead woman. And you all act like I am selfish for wanting something that is mine." That was the moment she almost became understandable. Almost. Grief has strange effects on the living around it. Marlene's absence had shaped Daniel. It had shaped me. It had likely stood in rooms with Marissa more often than I knew. But pain does not become virtue because it explains a wound. "You were not competing with Marlene," I said. "You were competing with gratitude. You saw every love Daniel had before you as a rival because you wanted him empty enough to fill." She flinched as if I had struck her. "He is my husband." "Yes, and tonight you used that word as a search warrant." She looked away. For a few seconds, the only sound was the idling SUV, and the wind moving through dry leaves along the ditch. Then she said, "He won't believe you." "Yes, he will. He loves me, he does. Then he will choose me." I shook my head. "No, he will finally choose what is true. That may not feel different to you, but it is." She began crying harder. Greg still stood by the open hatch, staring at the tools as if they belonged to someone else. Warren looked toward the road, giving us the dignity of pretending not to hear. Eddie watched me with the grave patience of a man who had known Marlene and understood that this conversation belonged as much to her as to anyone living. "Get in your car," I said. "Drive away. Do not go to Daniel tonight. Stay with Greg. Stay with your mother. Stay at a motel. I do not care. Daniel needs a few days without your voice in his ear. You cannot keep me from my own husband, no, but I can give him enough truth that when you speak, he hears the machinery under the words." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara against her skin. For the first time since I had known her, she looked badly assembled. Not poor, not defeated, just unfinished. She had spent years constructing herself as the woman who knew how rooms worked, how money worked, how image worked, how men could be guided if touched lightly enough at the elbow. At that gate in the cold, none of it worked. No restaurant light, no polished table, no social media caption. No husband apologizing before he understood what he had done wrong. Just tools in the back of a car, and an old man telling her the door had never been unlocked. She turned and walked back to the SUV. Greg closed the hatch. Before he got in, he looked at me once. "I didn't know," he said. "Maybe not," I said. "But you drove." He accepted that like a sentence. They got in. The SUV reversed slowly, its backup lights washing the dirt road pale. It turned around carefully between the ditches and drove south, red taillights shrinking until the woods swallowed them. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Warren finally closed his notebook. "You sure about not filing for tonight?" He nodded. "You have enough if you change your mind." "I know." He drove away 20 minutes later, after making sure the road stayed clear. Eddie offered me his couch, and I took it because the anger had gone out of me all at once, leaving my body hollow. His trailer smelled of coffee, wood smoke, and dog, though I had never known him to own a dog. He gave me a blanket and pointed me toward the couch with the floral pattern worn shiny at the arms. I sat but did not lie down. At 4 in the morning, I called Daniel from Eddie's kitchen. He answered on the first ring. "Dad." "She came," I said. I told him everything. Not gently, because gentleness can blur things that need edges. Not cruelly, because he had already been cut enough. I told him about the tools, the lie, Warren, the photographs, the gate. I told him what I had said about the trust in the prenup. I told him the box was not money. I told him it contained the things his mother saved, because she understood that memory is also property, and often the first thing greedy people destroy because it cannot be appraised. He did not interrupt. I heard him breathing. Once I heard something break, maybe a glass in his hand or maybe only a sound inside him. At the end he said, "Can I come up in the morning?" "Yes, I want to see it." "I know. I don't want her in the house when I get back." "Then do not go back until we make that true." He was quiet. Then he said, "Did Mom really know from the beginning?" "Not the beginning. Soon enough." "Was I stupid?" "No." "Dad." "No, Daniel. You were trusting. Those are not the same. But trust without attention becomes a place people can hide things." He cried then, not hard, not loudly, but with the deep exhaustion of a man finally setting down a weight and realizing it had bent him. I stayed on the line until he stopped apologizing. Then I told him to sleep if he could. Neither of us did. He arrived the next morning looking older than he had the day before. There are years the body gains gradually, and years that land overnight. He had not shaved. His eyes were red. He wore a work jacket over a shirt, wrinkled from being slept in or sat in all night. When he stepped from his car at the gate, he looked up the access road toward the cabin like a man approaching a hospital room after bad news. I put a hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it for half a second before remembering he was grown. We walked together. Eddie had gone ahead earlier to unlock nothing, because I wanted Daniel to see me do it. The road curved through spruce and birch, rising slowly. Morning came gray and cold. Dew clung to the weeds along the ruts. Daniel said nothing for the first 100 yards. Then he stopped near the bend, where the first view of the cabin appeared between trees. I remember this, he said. Of course you do. It feels smaller. You got bigger. He gave a painful half smile. Mom used to make pancakes on that stove. She burned the first batch every time. She said it was because the pan was old. It was because she refused to wait for the heat to settle. He laughed once, and the laugh broke into something close to a sob. I let him stand until he could walk again. Inside, the cabin held the night cold. I opened the shutters. Grey light spread across the old wood floor, the iron stove, the table with knife marks from my father cleaning fish. There, no matter how many times my mother told him tables were not workbenches. Daniel walked room to room slowly. He touched the back of a chair. He looked at the pencil marks on the doorframe where we had measured his height as a boy. He crouched to read the dates. Age 8, age 9, age 11. The last mark was 13. After that he had decided he was too old for such things, and Marlene had stood with the pencil in hand pretending not to be hurt. In the bedroom, I rolled back the rug. Daniel stood behind me. His breathing changed. I took the small pry tool from the drawer, slid it into the seam, and lifted the first board. The wood came up with the soft complaint of something disturbed after a long sleep. Then the second. The bark sat in the hollow below, wrapped in oilcloth. I lifted it carefully and set it on the bed. Daniel sat beside it but did not open it. His hands rested on his knees. He stared at the oilcloth for a long time. Finally he said, "This is what she came for." Yes, she would have torn the boards up. Likely, she would have thrown away anything that wasn't money. I think so. He nodded as if confirming a measurement. Then he untied the cloth. He opened the box slowly, and the morning changed. There are moments when a room becomes larger than its walls, because the dead enter it by way of objects. My father's tin came first. Daniel touched the letters but did not remove them. He knew enough to understand their fragility. Then the diaries. He ran his thumb over the cracked leather, his grandmother's handwriting on the labels. Then the deed, the photographs, the lock of hair, the tiny tooth. He picked up the hospital bracelet and stared at his own infant name printed in faded blue. Daniel Cole. Date, time, weight, proof that he had once been small enough to fit between Marlene's elbow and wrist. When he found the ring, everything in him stopped. Marlene's wedding band lay in a small velvet pouch, gold dulled by years away from skin. Daniel poured it into his palm. It looked impossibly small there. He closed his fingers around it, bent forward, and his shoulders shook. He made no sound. That was worse. I sat beside him and did not touch him because some grief needs space to finish entering the body. After a long time, he whispered, "She took it off before hospice." Yes, I thought it was lost. She wanted you to have it when you could understand what it meant. I understood then. No, son, you loved her then. Understanding came later. He opened his hand again. The ring sat there like a small sun, with no warmth left in it. I was not a good husband, he said. To Marissa, to myself. That answer emptied the room. I looked at him, my grown son, his face hollowed by truth, and I wished with a violence that startled me that Marlene could be there to hear him say it, not because it would have pleased her, but because she would have known exactly how to hold the moment without making him ashamed. "You can become one now," I said. He looked at me. "A good husband to yourself, a good steward of what was given to you, a good man who stops calling surrender patience." He closed the ring back into the pouch and placed it gently in the box. Then he shut the lid. His hands were steady now. "I am filing Monday." "All right. I want the locks changed today. I already called a locksmith. He can meet Eddie at your house by 5. I don't want to talk to her alone." "Then you won't." He looked at me with such naked relief that I had to turn away toward the window. Fathers like to believe their sons need less as they age. The truth is they need differently, and pride often keeps them from asking. Before we left, Daniel stood at the bedroom door and looked back at the floorboards. "What else did Mom set up that I do not know about?" I considered lying, not because I wanted to keep power, but because habit is a hard thing to kill. I had been the keeper for so long that opening one door made the rest tremble. "There is a letter," I said, "from Mom." "Yes, for me." "Yes, when were you supposed to give it to me?" "When this happened. If this happened. If this happened." "Where is it?" "In my safe at home. Can I have it tonight?" "Yes." He gave me a look I will carry until I die. It was not anger, though anger would have been fair. It was not gratitude, though gratitude came later in smaller ways. It was the look of a man realizing all at once that he had been loved by strategies he mistook for silence, protected by hands already weak from illness, and watched over by people who trusted him less with information than with survival. That is a complicated kind of love to receive. It humbles and wounds in the same motion. The divorce took 14 months, which people called fast because people who have never watched a marriage die in paperwork think time is measured by calendars. The prenup held. Marissa fought it first with outrage, then with legal creativity, then with tears, then with accusations about coercion, hidden assets, emotional abuse, and manipulation by a dead mother-in-law. Lydia Crane, who came out of semi-retirement for the pleasure of defending Marlene's work, dismantled each argument with the patience of a surgeon removing shrapnel. The recording of the signing meeting held. The trust held. The house Daniel lived in was sold under terms that left Marissa with nothing she had not brought and more shame than she could spend. The SUV was repossessed 3 weeks after Daniel stopped making payments. I did not watch that happen, though Eddie sent me a message saying he wished he could have. Marissa left with her premarital assets, which were not much, and a story she told anyone willing to listen about a controlling family that never accepted her. Some believed her. That is the way of things. A woman who has practiced victimhood in mirrors can perform it convincingly in public. Daniel lost friends. He lost invitations. He lost the version of himself who had thought endurance was proof of love. For months after filing, he moved through life carefully, like a man who had discovered weak boards under every rug. He apologized too much. He startled when his phone rang. He kept receipts for everything. He called me before making decisions that had nothing to do with me, then stopped himself halfway through and said, "Sorry, I don't need permission." Healing, if that is the word, did not arrive like sunrise. It arrived like cold water dripping through stone. He moved into a small craftsman bungalow 20 minutes from my house. The porch sloped slightly. The kitchen cabinets needed work. The rooms were modest and human. He furnished it with things you could sit on, without asking whether you were ruining an aesthetic. He bought a used dining table with scratches already in it, and told me he liked that nobody could threaten its perfection. For the first year, he did not date. He worked, went to therapy, fixed the porch, learned to cook 3 meals properly, and came to my place every Sunday unless weather or work interfered. Sometimes we talked about Marissa. Sometimes we did not. Sometimes he read his mother's letter again at my kitchen table and said nothing for an hour. The letter was 6 pages long. I will not repeat it. It belonged to him. I will say only that Marlene did not waste space with sentimentality. She told him she loved him. She told him she was sorry for leaving before he was ready. She told him that if he was reading the letter, then someone had tried to turn love into access. She told him that decency without boundaries becomes a tool in the hands of selfish people. She told him to grieve without making a temple out of his pain. She told him to choose a life that did not require him to disappear politely. At the end, in handwriting shakier than the first page, she wrote, "Your father will carry too much if you let him. Do not confuse his silence with strength. Ask him to put things down." Daniel read that sentence 3 times the first night. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since Marlene died, my son asked me whether I was lonely. A year and a half later, he met Grace. She taught 3rd grade in a town where the school still held winter concerts in a gym that smelled of floor wax and wet boots. The first time Daniel brought her to dinner, she arrived with a jar of homemade strawberry jam and no performance at all. She wore a green sweater with a small snag near the cuff, noticed it halfway through dinner, laughed, and said her cat had opinions about yarn. She asked me about my service and then listened to the answer, which is rarer than asking. She asked about Marlene without lowering her voice, as though the dead were a scandal. She did not touch Daniel to stop him speaking. She watched him when he talked, not to manage him but to know him. They married last spring in my backyard. 40 people, 1 fiddle player, a potluck dinner. Daniel wore his grandfather's suit, altered by a tailor who understood old fabric and did not try to make it modern. Grace carried wildflowers tied with ribbon from Marlene's sewing basket. There was no content photographer, though people took pictures. No signature cocktails, named after inside jokes nobody understood. No seating chart, designed like a military campaign. At one point during the reception, I looked across the yard and saw Daniel laughing with his whole body, while Grace stood beside him holding a paper plate piled with potato salad. The sight hurt, not because it was sad, but because it showed me how long he had lived without that ease. The cabin is still standing. I go every fall for 1 week alone. The first year after the gate, Daniel came with me. The second year he asked if Grace could come too, and I said yes. She caught a fish and screamed like it had insulted her. Daniel laughed so hard he had to sit down on the porch steps. I took a photograph of them there. Grace holding the fishing rod badly, Daniel leaning toward her, the cabin behind them in late afternoon light. Last year I added that photograph to the box under the floorboards. It belongs there now. Marlene would have liked her. I told Daniel that. He said he knew. He said he could feel it in the cabin, which is the kind of thing engineers do not say unless life has broken them open in useful ways. I am reading my mother's diaries by the wood stove, 1 a year. I am on the 4th. They are not what I expected. She was sharper than I knew, lonelier than I wanted to imagine, funnier in private than she was allowed to be in life. She wrote about my father with love and fury, braided so tightly, I sometimes have to close the book and stare at the fire. She wrote about me and Harley's as boys, about the fear of raising sons who might confuse hardness with manhood. She wrote once, after a fight with my father about money, that a family can be ruined by what it refuses to name. I underlined that in pencil, though I am not sure I had the right. There are people who look at an old truck, an old house, a worn jacket, and a quiet life, and decide there must be something hidden, some secret hoard, some withheld fortune, some treasure they are owed because they have mistaken appetite for destiny. They will scheme for it. They will ask small questions at Christmas. They will encourage doubt in the people who love them. They will drive through the night with bolt cutters in the back of a car and call it justice. And if they finally reach the floorboards and pry them up, if no one stops them at the gate, if they tear open the box with hungry hands, they will find letters from a dead soldier to the woman who waited for him. They will find diaries written by a woman who thought nobody would read her until the world had become kinder. They will find a ring removed from a dying hand so it would not be lost in hospice sheets. They will find a child's tooth, a lock of hair, photographs of people who lived and worked and loved without needing strangers to envy them. And they will not understand what they are looking at, because the treasure was never the money. It was never going to be the money. The treasure was the proof that people had loved one another carefully enough to keep evidence. The treasure was Marlene spending the last clear months of her life protecting a son who could not yet bear to know he needed protection. The treasure was my father writing home from a war he hated and folding each page as if paper could shorten an ocean. The treasure was my mother telling the truth in diaries, because the world did not make enough room for her to say it aloud. The treasure was a cabin that held memory without turning it into display. I think often about the chain of small choices that brought Marissa to that gate. She did not wake up one morning and become a woman who would drive into the Maine woods at midnight to break into her father-in-law's cabin. Almost nobody becomes themselves all at once. She got there one decision at a time. She decided Daniel's gentleness was negotiable. She decided his grief was competition. She decided my simplicity was deception. She decided Marlene's protections were insult. She decided tools in the back of an SUV could become moral if she called the theft transparency. Each decision may have felt small to her, reasonable, defensible. Put end to end, they became a road. That road led to a locked gate, a deputy with a flashlight, a brother who wished he had stayed home, and an old man who had been warned years before by a dying woman who saw clearly. That is the part I want my grandchildren to understand someday, if I am lucky enough to have any. Character is not something you decide to have on the day consequences arrive. It is built in the quiet choices before anyone is watching. It is built in what you do not take, in what you do not say, in whether you treat another person's grief as sacred or useful, in whether you can stand in front of a locked door and accept that not everything behind it belongs to you. Marlene saw clearly because she had practiced seeing clearly for 43 years. Daniel survived because his mother used what strength she had left to leave him protected from a future he could not imagine. I acted calmly that night not because I was noble, but because she had given me time to prepare, and because somewhere in our long marriage I had learned from her that anger does not need to shout to be final. Eddie showed strength by doing exactly what was necessary and no more. Hollies showed it by staying behind when he wanted to come. Deputy Warren showed it by standing in the cold and letting truth make its own record. Strength is not always the loud thing. Often it is the still thing, the thing that waits, the thing that records, the thing that locks the gate before the thief arrives and refuses to pretend the thief is only lost. If you have something worth protecting, a memory, a piece of land, a family story, a child too trusting for the world coming toward him, do not assume love alone will teach people how to honor it. Write things down. Tell the hard truths while there is still time to tell them cleanly. Talk to a lawyer. Leave letters. Build the gate before the headlights appear. My wife did, and her foresight outlived her by years. That is the inheritance Daniel received. Not money, not the cabin, not the box beneath the floor. The inheritance was the act of being loved clearly enough, in time, to be ready when greed came through the dark calling itself family. That is what was buried under my floorboards. That is what I never told my son until the night he needed to know. That is what Marlene left behind when her body could not stay. And that is why every fall when I kneel beside the bed in that cabin and lift the boards, I do it slowly with both hands steady, as if opening the floor is a kind of prayer. Because in a way it is. It is a prayer for the dead who protected us. It is a prayer for the living who finally learned. It is a prayer for the doors we lock, not out of fear, but out of love for what should never be stolen.